The day my son, Scott, screamed in my face that he didn't care about my $2,500 Social Security check and that I should cancel all my plans to continue supporting his family, I just smiled. My own plan to silence them forever had already begun. This was just the start of what these two parasites were about to experience. My name is Christina. I'm 71 years old and I've worked my fingers to the bone my entire life to reach this moment. 40 years of early mornings, sacrifices, and saving every single cent. While other women my age complained about having nothing, I meticulously planned every step of my future. I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my retirement. Travel to all those places I'd only seen in magazines. Eat in elegant restaurants, buy the beautiful clothes I always wanted but could never afford. For decades, my house filled with the aroma of my pot roast every Sunday. Scott would bring his friends, and I'd cook for everyone as if I were their personal servant. I vividly remember those afternoons, him boasting to his guests about what a good mother he had, while I sweated in the kitchen, preparing platter after platter. My mom makes the best pot roast in the whole neighborhood, he'd say with that fake smile I now see right through. When Scott married Brenda 5 years ago, I thought I'd finally get the daughter-in-law I'd always dreamed of. A sweet girl who would join me for tea, help me with my shopping, and perhaps give me the grandchildren I longed for. How naive I was. From day one, this woman looked at me as if I were an obstacle in her path to my money. The first few months were subtle. Brenda would come to my house in expensive red dresses she obviously couldn't afford on Scott's salary. When I'd ask her where she got them, she'd deflect. "Oh, Christina, a friend gave it to me," or "I got it at an incredible sale." But I wasn't stupid. Those dresses cost more than Scott earned in a whole month. Gradually, their visits became more frequent, but not out of affection. They'd arrive precisely at dinner time with hungry faces, expecting me to set the table for 3. Scott would hug me with that manipulative smile he'd perfected since childhood and say, "Mom, it smells delicious. Did you make enough for us?" As if I'd ever say no. After dinner, there was always something. "Mom, our fridge is broken." "Mom, we need to pay for car insurance." "Mom, Brenda has to see the doctor, but we don't have any money." It was always urgent, always important, and I always ended up opening my purse. I gave them the money, thinking it was only temporary. "When things get better financially, we'll pay you back everything," Scott promised me as I counted the bills I had just handed him. But the situation never improved. On the contrary, every month they needed more. $450 for the monthly groceries, $300 for Brenda's medical expenses, who always seemed to be suffering from something different. Meanwhile, I postponed my dreams. The trip to Spain I had planned for my 65th birthday became a maybe next year. The elegant dresses I saw in stores remained on the racks because Scott needed help with bills. My small apartment still had the old furniture because every extra cent I had ended up in their hands. But what hurt me most wasn't the money, it was the lack of respect. The way Brenda rummaged through my fridge without permission, as if it were hers. The way Scott would make expensive trip plans on the phone in my living room while I was washing their dishes. The sarcastic comments about my age, my habits, my clothes. "Christina, your best years are behind you," Brenda once said, trying on my necklace in front of my bedroom mirror. "You should think about enjoying the little you have left, instead of hoarding so much money." She said it with that sweet smile she used when she wanted something, but I saw the poison behind her words. That night, lying in bed, I made a decision. It was time to reclaim my life. The months after that realization were like blindfolds finally being removed. I started observing every detail, every gesture, every little lie I had previously ignored out of maternal love. And what I discovered turned my stomach in a way I never thought possible. Brenda had a habit of coming to my house when I was supposedly not there. She'd say she came to clean up a bit or prepare something special for my return. But I had started coming back earlier from my doctor's appointments, and what I found froze me. This woman wasn't cleaning anything. She walked through my house as if she were the owner, opening drawers, sifting through my papers, even trying on my jewelry in front of the mirror. One afternoon, I found her sitting at my kitchen table, counting a bundle of cash that I immediately recognized. It was the money I kept in a cookie jar, my emergency savings. $700 that I had collected cent by cent over months. When she saw me, she didn't flinch. She just smiled with that cheeky expression that had become her trademark. "Oh, Christina, you startled me," she said, putting my money into her purse as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Scott asked me to borrow this. We have an emergency with the car." One lie after another, but delivered with such composure that for a moment, I doubted my own sanity. "What kind of emergency?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, though I was seething inside. "The engine is making strange noises. The mechanic says if we don't get it fixed soon, it could completely break down and cost thousands to repair." Her acting was perfect, worried eyes, a trembling voice. She even put a hand to her chest as if the stress was killing her. That same night, I decided to verify her story. I went to the house where they lived, just 6 blocks from mine. Scott's car was parked in front of their building, shiny and perfectly functional. I knew it because I saw him drive it effortlessly when Scott came out to buy cigarettes. There was no strange noise, no mechanical emergency, just another elaborate lie to justify the theft. But that wasn't the worst thing I discovered that night. As I hid behind a tree, I saw Brenda emerge from the building in an emerald green outfit that must have cost more than my entire monthly Social Security check. High heels, a genuine leather bag, professional makeup. She didn't look at all like the sick, penniless woman who came to my house begging for help with medication. I followed her at a safe distance. She walked with a firm, confident stride to an elegant downtown restaurant, where a man was waiting for her, definitely not my son. Tall, well-dressed, with a gold watch that glittered even from my vantage point. They kissed on the mouth like lovers, not casual friends. My heart broke and hardened at the same time. For 2 hours, I watched them dine, laughing and behaving like a couple in love. Brenda paid the bill with bills from the same purse where she had hidden my money hours earlier. My $700 financed my daughter-in-law's romantic date with her lover. The walk back home seemed endless. Each step weighed so heavily, as if I had stones in my shoes. But it wasn't sadness I felt. It was something far more dangerous. It was pure, hard determination. This woman wasn't just stealing from me. She was humiliating me, making me an unwitting accomplice in her deception of my son. In the following weeks, I developed an investigative routine that would have impressed any private detective. I began writing down every lie, every inconsistency, every time they asked for money. I bought a small notebook that I kept hidden in my dresser, and there I noted everything with exact dates and times. March 1st, Brenda pretends to have stomach problems. Asks for $300 for medical tests. March 16th, I see her at the market carrying heavy bags and laughing with the vendors. A person with severe stomach problems cannot carry weights or eat the sausages she bought. March 20th, Scott asks for $450 because Brenda lost her job at the store. March 25th, I go past the store and ask about her. The manager tells me Brenda never worked there, but a woman matching her description often comes by to commit small thefts. April 2nd, they ask for $600 to pay the rent because the landlord has threatened eviction. April 3rd, I speak with Mrs. Emma, the neighbor from their building, who confirms they travel every weekend and bought brand new expensive furniture last month. Every note was a stab to my maternal heart, but also fuel for the plan that was beginning to form in my mind. I could no longer be the fool who financed their lies. I was 71 years old, had worked my entire life, and deserved to enjoy my golden years in peace, not as a cash cow for 2 fraudsters. One morning, checking my bank statements, I noticed something that took my breath away. In the last 2 years, I had given Scott and Brenda more than $10,500. $10,500, which amounted to over 4 months of my entire Social Security income. Money I had saved by denying myself small pleasures, postponing necessary repairs in my house, and buying the cheapest food at the market. $10,500 that they had spent on expensive clothes, elegant dinners, weekend getaways, and who knows what else, while I lived like a nun to help them. $10,500 that I would never get back because, in their warped perception, I owed them this help simply by being their mother. That afternoon, I decided to conduct one last test. I sent them a message telling them I was going on a short trip and they would have to house sit for me over the weekend. Of course, They enthusiastically accepted, but I didn't go anywhere. I stayed at my friend Pamela's house and came back Saturday evening to see what my dear adopted children were doing with my home. What I found exceeded my worst expectations. They had thrown a party. My living room was full of strangers drinking expensive alcohol, smoking cigarettes that stained my curtains, and using my good china as disposable plates. The mahogany table I had inherited from my mother was covered in glass rings, and someone had burned the surface with a cigarette. But what finally broke me was seeing Brenda wearing my pearl necklace, the one my husband had given me for our 10th wedding anniversary. She had put it on as if it were her own, telling guests it was a family heirloom she had inherited from her grandmother. In that moment, I knew the war had officially begun, and this time I would win. On Monday, after discovering the party at my house, I decided to confront the situation directly, but it wouldn't be an emotional confrontation like the ones I'd had before. This time, I was armed with information, evidence, and a composure that surprised even myself. I called Scott and told him we needed to talk about money urgently. Of course, he interpreted this as an opportunity to ask me for more financial assistance. He came to my house that same afternoon with Brenda. Both had feigned, concerned faces that no longer fooled me for a second. "Mom, it's good you called us," Scott began before I could speak. "We were just about to talk to you about a very delicate situation." He sat in my favorite armchair as if he were the master of the house, while Brenda made herself comfortable on the sofa with that practiced elegance she had perfected over the years of our acquaintance. "Brenda is very sick," Scott continued, taking his wife's hand with a tenderness that would have moved me if I hadn't known the truth. "The doctors found something in the tests, and she needs special treatments. We're talking about very high costs. Mom, we need your help more than ever." Brenda coughed weakly and put a hand to her chest, as if breathing hurt her. "I didn't want to worry you, Christina," she murmured in a broken voice. "But the doctors say if I don't start treatment soon, the consequences could be very serious." She even managed to tear up. Her acting had improved considerably over the years. "What kind of treatment?" I asked in a neutral tone. "Very expensive medications not covered by insurance," Scott quickly replied. "And some specialized therapies. We're talking about at least $2,500 to start." "Mom, I know it's a lot of money, but it's about my wife's health." $2,500. Exactly the amount of my entire monthly Social Security check. They wanted me to give them everything I received in a whole month to finance another of their elaborate lies. The audacity left me speechless for a moment, but not from shock, but from admiration for their brazenness. "That's a considerable sum," I told them. "Do you have medical records to confirm this diagnosis?" The question surprised them. I saw Scott and Brenda exchange a quick glance before she replied. "Of course, but they're in very complicated medical jargon. I don't think it's necessary to bother you with such confusing medical details." "On the contrary," I insisted, "I'm very interested in understanding exactly what's going on with your health, Brenda. As your future mother-in-law, it's my responsibility to be informed." The pressure was subtle but effective. I saw her slowly become nervous. "I have them at home," she mumbled. "Shall I bring them tomorrow if you insist?" "I insist," I confirmed with a smile that hopefully seemed motherly and not threatening. "In the meantime, let me tell you a little about my current financial situation." I pulled out my bank statements, my Social Security benefit notices, and the notes I had taken in recent weeks. I laid them on the coffee table with the same ceremony a lawyer presents evidence in a courtroom. "You see," I began, "I've been reviewing my expenses for the past 2 years, and I've noticed something very interesting. I've spent $10,500 helping you with various emergencies." I saw Scott's eyes widen slightly. He clearly hadn't been keeping track. $10,500, I repeated, so the number would sink in. That's more than 4 months of my entire Social Security income. Money I gave in good faith, trusting that you truly needed it to survive. "And we did, Mom," Scott interrupted. "Every cent you gave us was for essential expenses. We didn't waste anything." "Essential expenses?" I asked, opening my notebook. "Such as the $450 to fix the car that was never broken, Or the $700 for rent when you went to the beach that weekend instead? The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Brenda had visibly paled, and Scott opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water. Finally, he tried to counter with feigned indignation. "Were you spying on us?" he asked loudly, standing up from the armchair. "What kind of mother spies on her own son?" "The kind of mother who's tired of being taken for a fool," I replied, unflustered. "Did you know that the restaurant where you ate last week costs more for one meal than I spend on my food in a whole month?" Brenda finally spoke, but her voice no longer held the feigned sweetness from before. "Christina, I think you're misunderstanding things. We've never been dishonest with you." "Misunderstand?" I repeated, pulling out my phone. "Do I also misunderstand these photos I took of you buying expensive clothes at the mall with money you asked me for medication?" The photos were clear and unambiguous. Scott carrying bags from luxury stores, Brenda trying on shoes that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Both laughing and enjoying themselves as if they were millionaires. The date and time were digitally stamped, exactly 2 days after they had urgently asked me for money for medical expenses. That's not what it looks like," Scott stammered, but he didn't even sound convincing to himself. "Oh, isn't it?" I continued, relentlessly. "Then I suppose I also misunderstand that Brenda was wearing my pearl necklace at the party you threw in my house while I was supposedly away." Brenda's face changed completely. The mask of the sweet, sick woman fell away, revealing the true personality she had hidden for years. Her eyes hardened, and her voice took on a venomous tone she had never used with me before. "And what if I wore your necklace?" she snapped. "And what if we threw a party? You weren't there. Did you expect us to lock ourselves in and cry because of your absence?" "Brenda, be quiet," Scott whispered urgently to her. But it was too late. She had shown her true colors. "No, Scott, I'm tired of pretending," she continued, standing up. "I'm tired of pretending to be the perfect daughter-in-law for this stingy old hag. We're young, we have the right to enjoy life. And if she has money she's not using, it's only logical that she helps us." "Interesting philosophy," I remarked, maintaining the composure that so unsettled them. "So you admit it was all an act?" "Of course, it was an act." Brenda screamed, completely losing control. "Do you think it's normal for a woman my age to have to pretend affection for a stingy old hag who hoards her money like a miser? You can't take that money to your grave." Scott tried to calm her, but she was in full emotional eruption. "And yes, I wore your necklace, and I used your house, and I used everything I could because you accumulate everything and never enjoy it. At least we're putting your money to good use." "I see," I said with a smile that I finally allowed to be as cold as I felt inside. "So there's no real illness, no emergency, no plan to pay me back what you've stolen from me in 2 years." "Stolen is too strong a word," Scott cried, trying to regain some control of the situation. "We never stole from you. You gave us the money voluntarily." "Based on lies," I clarified, "which is technically called fraud." The atmosphere in my living room had become so tense that you could feel the electricity in the air. But I was calm, calmer than I had been in years. Finally, the moment I had been waiting for weeks had arrived. "Good," I said, closing my notebook and putting away the photos. "Now that there are no more secrets between us, I think it's time to talk about the future of our relationship." The two looked at me with a mixture of defiance and apprehension, but I knew I was just getting started. What they didn't know was that every word they had just said was being recorded by the small device I had hidden in my blouse. "The future of our relationship is quite simple," I continued, enjoying the tension that had settled in my living room. "From today, you will not receive another cent of my money. Not for real emergencies, not for invented ones, not for anything else." Scott jumped up, his face red with indignation. "You can't be serious. I'm your son. You have a moral obligation to help me." "Moral obligation," I repeated, savoring each word. "Like the moral obligation not to lie, not to steal from me, and not to turn my house into your personal amusement park?" Brenda had regained some composure, but her mask of sweetness no longer worked on me. "Christina, I think you're being very dramatic. We all make mistakes. We can talk about this like civilized adults. You're right, I agreed. Let's talk like adults. Like adults who will face the consequences of their actions. I pulled out my phone and began dialing a number. What are you doing? Scott asked with growing concern. I'm calling your Aunt Emma, I replied calmly. I think the whole family should know what kind of people you really are. Don't you dare. Brenda screamed, trying to snatch the phone from me, but I was faster and evaded her reach. Hello, Emma, I said as my sister-in-law picked up. Yes, it's Christina. Do you have a few minutes? I have something very important to tell you about Scott and Brenda. The faces of my visitors were so aghast that I almost smiled. For the next 15 minutes, I told Emma the whole truth. Every lie, every deception, every humiliation I had suffered in 2 years. My sister-in-law listened in silence, occasionally making shocked and disapproving noises. Meanwhile, Scott and Brenda sat like statues, fully aware that every word I said was destroying their reputation in the family. Emma wants to talk to you, I said to Scott, handing him the phone. No, he mumbled, shaking his head. I don't want to talk to anyone. That's your aunt, I insisted. The woman who raised you for 6 months when I was sick, who paid for your college when I didn't have the money. You will talk to her. The phone kept ringing until Emma hung up. The silence that followed was deafening. This won't end here, I announced, putting away my phone. Tomorrow, I'll call every family member. Your cousins, your uncles, the neighbors, everyone will know exactly what kind of people you are. You're a vengeful, bitter old woman. Brenda spat at me, completely losing her composure. You have no right to ruin our lives over a few dollars. A few dollars? I repeated incredulously. $10,500 is not a few dollars for a retiree. It's my freedom, my security, my future. Scott finally found his voice. Mom, please, we can fix this. We'll pay you back every cent. I promise you. With what money? I asked. With the money you don't have because you don't work? Or will you, for the first time in your lives, find an honest job? I work. Scott yelled. You work part-time in a warehouse and spend more on one dinner than you earn in a week, I reminded him. And Brenda doesn't even pretend to look for a job. She dedicates herself full-time to professional freeloading. Enough. Scott roared, slamming his fist on my coffee table. My glasses rattled from the impact. I will not let you insult my wife in my presence. This isn't your house, I reminded him coldly. And if you don't like how I talk, you can leave. In fact, I suggest you leave now, because what's coming next will be even worse. What do you mean? Brenda asked with a trembling voice. Instead of answering, I went to my bedroom and came back with a cardboard box full of documents. I placed it on the table with a dry thud that echoed through the living room. For the past 3 weeks, I've documented everything, I explained, opening the box. Every lie you've told me, every time you've used my house without permission, every item you've borrowed and never returned. I pulled out folders organized by date, each with photos, receipts, and my detailed notes. This folder contains evidence of all the times you demanded money for non-existent medical emergencies. This one has the photos of you spending that money on luxury. And this one, I said, holding up a particularly thick folder, contains very interesting information about Brenda's extracurricular activities. Brenda's face turned chalk white. What do you mean? Shall I tell Scott about your lover? I asked casually. Or would you like to do it yourself? The silence that followed was so deep you could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Scott slowly turned to his wife with a look of confusion that quickly turned into understanding and horror. What lover? He asked in a hoarse voice. Brenda opened and closed her mouth several times before finding words. Christina is lying. She's making things up to break us apart. I pulled out the photos I had taken the night I followed her to the restaurant. Clear photos of her kissing another man, snuggling up to him, behaving like a couple in love. I handed them to Scott without a word. I watched as each picture was a direct stab to his heart. His hands trembled as he looked through the photos one by one. When he reached the last one, where Brenda was paying the bill with my stolen money, he dropped everything to the floor. "Since when?" he asked without looking at his wife. "Scott, I can explain," Brenda began, but her voice sounded desperate. "Since when?" he roared, standing up so abruptly that he knocked over his chair. 6 months, she finally murmured, admitting the truth. 6 months. Scott repeated, as if the words were poison in his mouth. 6 months you've been using my mother's money to finance your secret romance? He turned to me with tearful and angry eyes. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I wanted you to see for yourself what kind of people you both are," I replied. "If I had told you weeks ago, you would have made excuses for her. You would have blamed everyone but yourselves. This is your fault." Brenda screamed at me, completely losing control. "If you had given us more money, if you had been more generous, I wouldn't have had to look for attention elsewhere." "Are you blaming my mother for your infidelity?" Scott asked incredulously. "I'm telling the truth," Brenda continued. "Your mother is a stingy old hag who judges everyone. It's impossible to live in her shadow." "It was easier to do it with my money," I added calmly. "You've broken up my daughter-in-law, my wife, my family." Scott screamed at me. "This is all your fault. You're a witch." "I am a woman who has finally decided to defend her dignity," I clarified. "And now that the truth is out, your decisions and the consequences that follow are your problem alone." Scott sank heavily onto the sofa, his head in his hands. "I can't believe how stupid I was," he mumbled. "I can't believe I let this go on for so long." "Good," I said, closing the folders and putting them back in the box. "Now that you know the whole truth, it's time to talk about the consequences." Both looked at me with terror, as if they had finally understood that this was no ordinary family dispute. This was something far more serious, something that would change their lives forever. "First," I continued, counting on my fingers, "I want you to leave my house right now and never come back. Second, I want you to return every item you took from here, including my pearl necklace. And third," I paused dramatically, enjoying their fear. "Third, first thing tomorrow morning, I will be making some very important calls that will ensure the entire town knows exactly who you are." "What calls?" Scott asked with a trembling voice, though I think he already suspected the answer. "The kind of calls that will make you wish you had never been born," I replied with a smile that I knew was more threatening than any scream. "But before that, you have exactly 1 hour to bring back everything you've stolen from my house. And when I say everything, I mean everything." I pulled out a list I had prepared in recent weeks. Each item was detailed with a description, approximate value, and the date it had disappeared from my house. My pearl necklace, my white gold earrings, the crystal figurine in my living room, the 3 cookbooks you borrowed, the knitted blanket my mother made for me, and the $200 cash Brenda took from my jewelry box last week. "I didn't take any money from your jewelry box," Brenda protested, but her indignation sounded false even to herself. "Oh, didn't you?" I asked, pulling out my phone again. "Would you like to see the video from the security camera I installed in my bedroom?" Both froze. Of course, there was no security camera, but their reaction confirmed everything. Brenda turned so pale I thought she would faint. 1 hour, I repeated, pointing to the wall clock. "Not a minute longer, and if anything from the list is missing, the consequences will be far worse than I've already planned." They scurried like rats abandoning a sinking ship. I watched them from my window, walking quickly to their building, arguing fiercely in the street. Scott gesticulated wildly, while Brenda tried to defend herself, but it was too late for explanations. 50 minutes later, they were back at my door. Scott carried a plastic bag with my belongings, while Brenda kept her head down, avoiding my gaze. It was obvious they had been crying, but that no longer moved me as it once had. "Here's everything," Scott mumbled, handing me the bag as if it were toxic. I carefully checked every item. Everything was there, even things I didn't have on my list but recognized as mine. Apparently, in fear of what I might do if I discovered more thefts, they had opted for a complete purge. "Perfect," I said, satisfied. "Now for the fun part." Without further ceremony, I dialed the number of Anna, the most efficient gossip in the neighborhood. If you wanted news to spread throughout the town in less than 24 hours, Anna was the best choice. "Hello, Anna," I said in a sweet voice. "Do you have time for a very interesting conversation? It's about Scott and his wife." "Yes, I have some stories that will fascinate you." I saw Scott and Brenda exchange panicked glances. They knew exactly what it meant if Anna learned their secrets. Within hours, everyone within 10 blocks would know the whole truth. For 20 minutes, I told Anna every dirty detail: the systematic fraud, the medical lies, the infidelity, the theft of my possessions. Anna made appropriate shocked noises at the right places, and I knew she was taking notes to share the story later. "And you say this went on for 2 years?" Anna asked incredulously. "My goodness, Christina, you're a saint for putting up with that for so long." "Well, I'm not a saint anymore," I replied, looking directly at Scott. "Now I'm a woman who will make sure these two get exactly what they deserve." When I hung up, the silence in my living room was deathly quiet. Scott and Brenda stood like pillars of salt, aware that their reputation had just been destroyed with a single phone call. "That was just the first call," I cheerfully announced. "Tomorrow, I'll call Anna, the church secretary. She handles the community bulletin. Did you know there's a section for neighborhood warnings? I think your story fits perfectly." "Please," Scott pleaded, tears streaming down his cheeks. "We get it. We've learned our lesson. Don't do this." "The lesson?" I repeated with a bitter laugh. "Which lesson? Not to steal, not to lie, to respect your own mother? Those are lessons you should have learned at 5 years old." Brenda finally found her voice. "Christina, please. I know we made mistakes, but this will completely ruin our lives." "You'll leave us?" I asked, feeling the anger I had suppressed for months beginning to boil. "And what about my life? What about the 2 years I lost working as your personal slave? What about the money you stole from me? Money that represented my dreams, my retirement plans?" I stood up and began pacing the living room, feeling each word as a liberation. "Do you know what I wanted to do with that $10,500? I wanted to travel to Spain, to see the village where my grandmother was born. I wanted to walk the streets where she grew up. I wanted to visit the church where she got married. That was my dream for 30 years. "You can still make that trip," Scott mumbled. "No," I shouted, finally letting out all the pent-up rage. "I can't, because you stole not only the money but also the time. I'm 71. Every year that passes is one less year I have to enjoy life, and you stole 2 whole years from me." The echo of my shout reverberated off the walls. I had played the understanding mother, the patient wife, the silent victim for so long that I had forgotten how liberating it was to express my true anger. "But that's not all," I continued, returning to my calm but deadly tone, "because tomorrow I will also make another very special call. Do you remember Benjamin, Scott's boss at the warehouse?" Scott turned pale. "No, don't do that." "Oh yes, I will," I confirmed. "I'll tell him about his exemplary employee who specializes in defrauding elderly women. I wonder what the company will think of having a thief on the payroll. That job is the only thing I have." Scott protested desperately. "You should have thought of that," I replied without mercy. "And as for you, Brenda, I have special plans for you too. Does your lover know you're a married woman who funds her dates by stealing money from her old mother-in-law?" Brenda began to sob. He doesn't know anything about it." "Well, tomorrow he will know everything," I announced. "In fact, I think I'll personally invite him to a little meeting where I'll explain exactly who he's sleeping with." "You're a demon," Brenda screamed, completely losing control. "You're a bitter, vengeful old woman who can't stand to see others happy." "Happy?" I repeated incredulously. "Do you call a life full of lies, theft, and betrayal happy? Is that your definition of happiness?" "At least we live," she screamed back. "At least we're not holed up like a stingy rat, counting our coins." "Interesting," I said, pulling out my phone again. "I think Anna would like to hear this part too. Would you like to repeat what you just said?" Especially the part where you call me a stingy rat.
No.
Scott pleaded, trying to silence his wife. Brenda, be quiet now. But the damage was done. Every insult, every pathetic justification, every revelation of their true nature was documented. And tomorrow, everyone would know not only about their crimes but also about their despicable attitude toward an elderly woman who had only tried to help them. I think that's enough for today, I finally announced. You have exactly 5 minutes to leave my house before I call the police for trespassing. This conversation isn't over yet. Scott threatened me on his way to the door. You're right, I agreed with an icy smile. Tomorrow it will be much more interesting. That night I couldn't sleep, but not out of fear or regret. It was the pure adrenaline of knowing that after 2 years of humiliation, I had finally regained control of my life. I got up before sunrise and began the second phase of my plan. The first call went to Anna, the church secretary. Anna was an efficient woman who not only managed the community bulletin but also the most extensive communication network in the neighborhood. If you wanted something to reach the right people, Anna was the perfect ally. Good morning, Anna, I said when she picked up. It's Christina. Do you have a few minutes? I have something very important to tell you about community safety. In the next half hour, I explained in detail Scott and Brenda's modus operandi, how they identified vulnerable elderly women, how they invented medical and financial emergencies, how they gained trust before systematically starting to steal. I presented their case not as a family drama, but as a public safety warning. That's terrible, Christina, Anna replied with genuine concern. Many of our elderly community members could fall victim to such scams. I will definitely publish a warning in this week's community bulletin. I'll email you photos and documentation, I offered, so people can identify them if they approach them with their false stories. After speaking with Anna, I dialed the number of the warehouse where Scott worked. I asked to speak directly with Benjamin, his supervisor, identifying myself as the employee's mother. Mr. Benjamin, I began in a concerned voice, I need to speak with you about something very delicate regarding Scott. I'm afraid he's been involved in activities that could jeopardize your company's reputation. Benjamin was a serious man who valued integrity above all else. As I explained that Scott had used his position as a respected employee to gain credibility in his scams against the elderly, I could hear his voice harden with each detail. Are you sure of these accusations, Mrs. Christina? He finally asked. I have complete documentation, I confirmed. Photos, recordings, receipts. If you wish, I can bring them to you personally this afternoon. Please do, he replied immediately. This behavior completely goes against our company values. We cannot have employees using their connection to our company to commit fraud. The third call was the most satisfying. I had gotten Brenda's lover's number through research that had taken several days. His name was Adam. He worked in an office downtown and apparently had no idea that his new girlfriend was married.
Adam.
I asked when a male voice answered the phone. Yes, who's speaking? My name is Christina. I'm Brenda's mother-in-law. I think she and I need to have a very important conversation about you. The silence that followed was so long that I thought he had hung up. Finally, his voice spoke again, noticeably more strained. Brenda's mother-in-law? Who? Brenda's, I repeated clearly. My daughter-in-law, who is married to my son, Scott, and with whom you've been having an affair for 6 months. There must be a mistake, Adam stammered. The woman I know is named Brenda, but she's not married. She told me she was single. She lied to you about that too, I informed him. Just as she lied about where the money comes from that she spends on her expensive dinners. Did she tell you it's stolen money from an elderly woman? In the next 20 minutes, I told Adam the whole truth about his perfect mistress, how she was married, how she had defrauded her in-laws, how every cent she had spent on him came from theft and lies. I could hear his world collapsing with each revelation. I have photos of the two of you together, I added at the end. Photos I'm willing to share with my son if you don't end this relationship immediately and tell Brenda exactly why. That can't be true, Adam murmured. Yes, it's true, I confirmed. And if you don't believe me, I suggest you ask Brenda tonight about her husband, Scott. Ask her about the $10,500 she stole from my retirement. Ask her about all the lies she's told you in recent months. When I hung up, I felt a deep satisfaction. Adam seemed like a decent man who had been defrauded just as I had. But unlike me, he had the opportunity to get out of that situation immediately. The phone rang less than an hour later. It was Scott, and his voice sounded desperate. "What did you do?" "My boss just called me for an emergency meeting." "I just kept my promise," I replied calmly. "I told you there would be consequences." "They're going to fire me," he screamed. "That's the only job I have. Without that job, we can't pay the rent." "You should have thought of that before you became a professional fraudster," I reminded him. "Your actions have consequences, Scott. It's time you learned that. Please, call him back. Tell him it was a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," I replied firmly. "It was systematic criminal behavior that lasted for 2 years. Your boss deserves to know what kind of person he hired." The phone rang again 20 minutes later. This time it was Brenda, and she was hysterical. "What did you say to Adam?" "He just broke up with me. He says I'm a liar and a cheat." "I told him the truth," I replied. "Something you've obviously never done." "He was the only good thing in my life," she sobbed. "He was the only person who made me happy." "He was the only person willing to be fooled by your lies," I corrected her. "But like all decent men, when he found out who you really were, he chose to leave." "This won't stand," she threatened me through tears. "We'll make sure you regret everything." "Oh, really?" I asked with genuine curiosity. "How will you get your revenge on me? By defrauding more elderly women? Will you invent more lies? Will you steal more things from my house?" "We will." She began, but stopped abruptly. "You will what?" I persisted. "Will you tell the truth about yourselves? Will you publicly admit that you are fraudsters, because that's exactly what I'm doing? So I don't see how that could hurt me." The silence that followed confirmed to me that they had finally understood the reality of their situation. They had no weapons against me because I was speaking the truth, while their entire lives were built on lies that were quickly collapsing. "The difference between you and me," I continued, "is that I have nothing to hide. You, on the other hand, have an entire life of deception that will gradually be exposed." That afternoon, I received a call from Emma, who confirmed that the news had spread throughout the family. Scott's cousins were shocked, the uncles were outraged, even family friends began to recall small inconsistencies in the stories Scott and Brenda had told over the years. "Pamela says she understands now why Brenda always had such expensive clothes," Emma told me, and Justin remembered that Scott had asked him for money 6 months ago, faking a medical emergency that apparently never existed. "Does that surprise you?" I asked. "It surprises me that it took so long," Emma admitted. "And it makes me angry that they put you through all that without any of us noticing." "It wasn't your responsibility to notice," I assured her. "It was my responsibility to set boundaries, and I'm finally doing that." That night, as I reviewed all the documentation I had collected in recent weeks, I realized I had achieved something I hadn't expected. I had not only exposed Scott and Brenda, but I had also rediscovered my own strength. For 2 years, I had been a victim. Now, I was a woman taking control of her life and demanding respect. On Saturday morning, exactly 1 week after I caught Brenda counting my money in the kitchen, I decided it was time for the final act of this tragedy they had written themselves. It was time for the public confrontation that would brand them forever. I knew Scott and Brenda would be desperate. Scott had lost his job on Friday afternoon, as Benjamin had confirmed to me on the phone. "We cannot keep employees who jeopardize our company's reputation," he had told me firmly. Brenda had lost her lover, and according to my sources, Adam had been quite explicit about the reasons for the breakup, leaving her humiliated before her friends. But I wanted more than just private consequences. I wanted the entire community to see exactly who these people were who had exploited an elderly woman for 2 whole years. At 10 a.m., I called Scott. "I need you to come to my house immediately. There's something very important to discuss about your future." "Our future?" he asked with a hopeful voice. He surely thought I had softened, that I was ready to forgive and forget, as I had so many times before. Yes, I confirmed, your economic future, your social future, your future in this community. Come now, or the consequences will be even worse. They arrived in less than half an hour, visibly nervous, but with a glimmer of hope in their eyes. Scott wore his best shirt, as if he were going to a job interview. Brenda had meticulously applied makeup, probably hoping to use her charms again to manipulate me. Sit down, I commanded, pointing to the sofa. I have a proposal for you. They quickly sat down, exchanging glances that clearly said, I told you so. The old lady has softened. In recent weeks, I've thought a lot about our situation, I began in a thoughtful tone, and I've come to the conclusion that perhaps I was too hard on you. I saw Scott visibly relax. Brenda even dared to smile slightly. After all, I continued, you're family, aren't you? And family forgives, right? Exactly, Mom, Scott said, leaning forward with enthusiasm. We're family. We can get through this together. That's why, I announced, I've decided to host a small family gathering to announce that we've resolved our differences and are still a united family.
A gathering?
Brenda asked cautiously. Yes, I confirmed. I've invited the whole family, the neighbors, some friends from church. I want everyone to see that I forgive you and that we're ready to start anew. It was a lie, of course. I had forgiven nothing, and we were definitely not starting anew, but I needed them to willingly come to their own public execution. When would this gathering be? Scott asked. Today, I replied, at 4 p.m. in my backyard. Everything is already prepared. Today? Brenda exclaimed, but that's too little time to prepare ourselves. You don't need to prepare anything, I assured them. You just need to come and be ready to admit your mistakes to the family. After that, all will be forgiven, and we can move on. I watched them argue in silence with their eyes. Finally, Scott nodded. All right, Mom. If that's what you need to forgive us, we'll be there. Perfect, I said, smiling with the warmth I had perfected over decades of maternal care. I'll see you at 4 p.m. As soon as they left, I began the final preparations. In the past week, I had secretly coordinated with various family members and neighbors, not for a reconciliation, but for something entirely different. At 3:30 p.m., my backyard was full. Emma had come with her husband and her 2 adult children. Pamela was there with her sister, Anna, who had obviously been waiting for this moment all week. Anna, the church secretary, had come accompanied by 3 ladies from the church, all curious about the details of the story that had spread like wildfire in the neighborhood. Even some neighbors I barely knew had come, drawn by the rumors of the family drama. Are you sure you want to do this? Emma asked me as we arranged the chairs in a circle. I've never been more sure in my life, I replied. These 2 have lived off lies for years. It's time they faced the truth in front of witnesses. I had prepared a table with refreshments and snacks, giving the gathering the appearance of a normal family celebration. But in the middle of the table, prominently displayed, I had placed a cardboard box labeled Evidence. Promptly at 4 p.m., Scott and Brenda appeared at my back door. They had dressed for a special occasion, clearly expecting a ceremony of forgiveness and reconciliation. When they saw the crowd, their smiles became a little forced, but they walked forward. How wonderful that you all came, Scott called out, greeting relatives with hugs and backpats. It's perfect to have the whole family gathered. Brenda played her role too, kissing cheeks and remarking how beautiful the garden looked. But I noticed her eyes constantly darting to the box labeled Evidence. Please, everyone take a seat, I announced when the moment arrived. I want to thank each of you for coming this afternoon. As you know, we've had some family misunderstandings lately, and I thought it would be important to clear things up publicly. Scott and Brenda sat in the 2 chairs I had strategically placed in the center of the circle, like defendants in a courtroom. Scott, Brenda, I continued in the loving tone they had heard for years, would you like to tell everyone what kind of misunderstandings we've had exactly? Scott nervously cleared his throat. Well, there have been some misunderstandings regarding money, and... Misunderstandings. I repeated, savoring the words. Do you call systematic theft misunderstandings now? The garden fell silent. Scott blinked several times, as if he hadn't heard correctly. Excuse me, theft, I repeated clearly, so everyone would hear. Or do you prefer the word fraud? Perhaps embezzlement? Mom, Scott mumbled, with growing panic in his eyes. I thought this was about peace. Oh, but it is about peace, I confirmed, standing up and walking to the evidence box. It's about peace with the truth, peace with justice, peace with my own dignity. I ceremoniously opened the box and pulled out the first folder. Would you like me to tell everyone about the $10,500 you stole from me over the past 2 years? Christina. Emma cried out in genuine shock. $10,500? Yes, I confirmed, showing the receipts and documents. Every cent documented here, every lie you invented to get the money, every fake emergency, every invented illness, every contrived crisis. I saw Scott try to stand up, but Pamela, who was sitting behind him, placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Stay seated, young man. Your mother isn't finished yet. But that's not all, I continued, pulling out the second folder. Did you know that Brenda has been having an affair for the past 6 months? The garden exploded in shocked murmurs. Brenda turned chalk-white and began shaking her head violently. That's not true. Not true. I asked, pulling out the photos. Then who is this man you're kissing in these pictures? Your twin brother. I passed the photos around the circle of guests. Each person who saw them made sounds of disgust and disapproval. Scott looked at them as if they were venomous snakes. And here's the best part, I announced, pulling out the restaurant receipts. Do you see these bills from expensive restaurants? Do you know what money paid for them? My money, the money she borrowed from me for her alleged medication. Absolute silence had fallen over the garden. All eyes were on Scott and Brenda, who looked like 2 animals caught in the headlights of a car. But wait, I announced, raising a hand to keep everyone's attention, because there's more, much more. I pulled out my phone and connected it to a small portable speaker that I had prepared specifically for this moment. During our last conversation in my living room, I managed to record some very interesting confessions. Would you like to hear them? Scott jumped from his chair as if he had received an electric shock. You can't do that. That conversation was private. Private. I repeated with an icy smile. Like the times you came into my house without permission, like the privacy when you counted my money in my kitchen, Brenda? Without waiting for an answer, I pressed the play button. Brenda's voice echoed clearly through the garden. And what if I wore your necklace? And what if we threw a party? You weren't there. We're young. We have the right to enjoy life. And if she has money she's not using, it's only logical that she helps us. The murmurs of indignation intensified. I saw Anna put a hand to her chest, visibly appalled by the lack of respect. The recording continued with Brenda's voice screaming, "Of course, it was an act. Do you think it's normal for a woman my age to have to pretend affection for a stingy old hag who hoards her money like a miser? You can't take that money to your grave." The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. All eyes were on Brenda, who was red with shame and anger. "Stop the recording," she screamed, trying to grab my phone, but Pamela blocked her with a look that would have frozen hell. "Oh, we're just getting started," I said, switching to another recording. This time, it was Scott's voice. "I'm your son. You have a moral obligation to help me." And then his voice, screaming when he discovered the photos of the infidelity. "Since when? Since when?" 6 months, Brenda's recorded voice replied. Emma stood up, trembling with indignation. "How could you do that to Christina? She's a 71-year-old woman who only tried to help you. You don't understand." Scott cried desperately. "Things are difficult. We needed help." "Help for what?" Anna interjected sharply. "To pay for expensive restaurants, to buy luxury clothes, to fund love affairs?" "You know nothing about our lives," Brenda retorted, finally losing her composure completely. "You don't know what it's like to live with little money." "Live with little money?" I cried incredulously. You don't know what it's like to live with little money. I worked honestly for 45 years to have a decent retirement. I pulled more documents from the box. Do you want to know how this poor woman lived with little money? Here are the receipts from your purchases. Dresses for $400, shoes for $275, dinners for $200. All paid with my stolen money. And here, I continued, pulling out another folder, are the photos of the party you threw in my house. My house, which was turned into your private club while I was supposedly away. I passed the photos around the circle. Pictures of strangers drinking in my living room, using my good china, staining my mahogany table, and in the middle of it all Brenda, wearing my pearl necklace as if it were her own. That necklace! Anna exclaimed, recognizing it immediately. That's the one your late husband gave you for your anniversary. Exactly, I confirmed. The necklace my husband bought with his first salary after opening his workshop. A gift of love that this woman used to impress her drunk friends. Brenda finally exploded. Enough. Yes, I took some things. Yes, I used your money. But you also had benefits. We kept you company. We gave you a family. Company. I repeated with a bitter laugh. Do you call it company to lie to my face for 2 years? Do you call it family to systematically steal from me? At least we visited you. Scott screamed. At least we didn't leave you alone like other children. You came for the money. I reminded him. Every visit, every hug, every I love you, Mom, was just to soften me up before you asked for more money. Emma turned to Scott with tear-filled eyes. How could you? Christina raised you alone after your father died. She worked 2 jobs to put you through college, and this is how you repay her. You don't understand the pressure, Scott defended himself. You don't know what it's like to run a house, pay bills, try to live with dignity. Live with dignity? Pamela asked sarcastically. Is it dignified to steal from your elderly mother? Is it dignified to invent illnesses to get money?
Is it dignified to cheat on your husband with another man, Brenda?
Brenda stood up abruptly. I'm not staying here to listen to this.
Let's go, Scott.
No, Scott said, surprisingly, remaining seated. For the first time that afternoon, his voice sounded different, smaller, more ashamed. No, Brenda, I think we have to listen. Are you crazy? His wife snapped at him. They're humiliating us publicly. We're humiliating ourselves, Scott mumbled, looking down. Everything Mom says is true. Everything. I watched as something broke in my son at that moment. The denial, the justification, the defensive anger, everything collapsed. And for the first time in years, I saw the child I had raised beneath the mask of the fraudster. Yes, I said gently. Everything is true, and now everyone knows it. But there's one more thing, I announced, pulling the last document from the box, the notarized will I had signed yesterday morning. The entire garden leaned forward, eager for the final revelation. I have changed my will, I declared with a clear, firm voice. Scott is no longer my heir. Every cent of my inheritance, every item in my house, every investment I have, will now be donated to charities that help elderly people who have been victims of family fraud. The silence that followed was absolute. Scott looked at me as if he couldn't process the words he had just heard. Furthermore, I continued, I have applied for a restraining order. Scott and Brenda are prohibited from approaching my house, calling me, or contacting me in any way. If you violate this order, you will be immediately arrested. No, you can't do that. Scott stammered. I'm your son. You were my son, I corrected him. Sons don't steal from their mothers. Sons don't lie systematically. Sons don't make their mothers victims of fraud. Please, he then pleaded, tears running down his cheeks. Please, Mom, we can change. We can be better. It's too late for that, I replied, feeling a strange mix of sadness and liberation. You had 2 years to be better. You chose to be worse. Brenda, who had heard all this with growing horror, finally found her voice. This won't stand. We'll contest the will. We'll prove you're crazy. Try it, I challenged her, but you'll need evidence of madness, and I have 2 years of documentation proving exactly the opposite, that I am a reasonable woman who has finally decided to protect herself from 2 fraudsters." Anna stood up and slowly began to applaud. Soon, the whole garden applauded. It wasn't applause of celebration, but of respect for a woman who had finally found the strength to defend herself. Scott and Brenda stood up to leave, but before they could move, Emma blocked their path. "Not so fast. I think you owe Christina an apology. A real apology." "An apology?" Brenda asked incredulously. "After what she just did to us?" "After what you did to yourselves," Pamela corrected her. "Christina just revealed the truth." Scott finally looked up at me. His eyes were red and swollen. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I don't know how we got this far." "You got this far by choosing the easy way instead of the right way," I replied. "But Scott, even if you are no longer my heir, you are still the son I raised. If one day you decide to become an honest man, if one day you decide to earn your money instead of stealing it, perhaps we can talk. But until that day, you do not exist to me." The months that followed that afternoon in my garden were the most liberating of my life in decades. Finally, I had not only regained my money and my dignity, but something far more valuable, my inner peace. The news of the confrontation spread like wildfire throughout the town. Anna kept her promise and published a detailed warning in the community bulletin, alerting other families to the fraudulent methods that Scott and Brenda had perfected. Several older women approached me to tell me they had had similar suspicions about their own relatives. "Christina, you're an inspiration," Mrs. Anna told me 2 weeks after the incident. "My grandson had asked me for money with strange stories, but after hearing your experience, I decided to investigate. I discovered he had lied about tuition costs to gamble online." Scott and Brenda disappeared almost immediately from the neighborhood. According to rumors that reached me through the local gossip network, they had to move into a tiny apartment on the outskirts of town because no one in the area wanted to rent to them. Their reputation had preceded them everywhere. Adam, Brenda's ex-lover, proved to be a more decent man than I had imagined. 3 months after our phone call, he appeared at my door with a bouquet of flowers and a formal apology. "Mrs. Christina," he said with sincere shame, "I wanted to come personally to ask for your forgiveness for being, albeit unknowingly, part of the pain that woman inflicted on you. Had I known she was married and using stolen money." "You don't have to apologize for anything, Adam," I reassured him, inviting him in. "You were also a victim of her lies." During that conversation, I learned that Brenda had told him elaborate stories. She was a divorced woman struggling after an abusive marriage. She told me her ex-husband had left her penniless, and her in-laws were her only family who would help her, he explained. I thought she was being generous to a needy daughter-in-law, not that he was funding a scam. "Do you know what bothers me most?" I confessed to him. "It's not so much the money I lost. It's the time. 2 years of my life I spent trying to help people who didn't want help, but exploitation. 2 years in which I postponed my own dreams to finance their luxury. But I decided not to waste another day complaining. With the money I recovered by selling some items I no longer needed and by reorganizing my investments, I was finally able to make that trip to Spain I had dreamed of for decades. The flight to Madrid was magical. For the first time in years, I traveled for myself, spending my money on something I truly wanted, without the constant guilt that Scott might need that amount for an emergency. I walked the streets where my grandmother had grown up. I visited the church where she had married. I ate in small local restaurants without counting every cent. In one of these restaurants, I met Samuel, a 73-year-old widower who was also making the trip of a lifetime after caring for his sick wife for years. We immediately became friends, connected by the shared experience of finally living for ourselves after decades of living for others. "Do you know what I like best about being here?" he said one afternoon as we drank coffee in a square in Toledo. "That every decision I make is my own. If I want to look at this cathedral for an hour longer, I stay. If I want to spend $40 on a history book, I spend it. No one is waiting at home for me with an invented emergency." I returned from Spain transformed, not just physically. I had lost weight by walking through those beautiful cities and had bought clothes that made me feel elegant, but emotionally too. I had remembered who I was before I became Scott and Brenda's victim. Back home, I began making changes I had put off for years. I renovated my kitchen, bought new furniture, joined a reading group at the local library. For the first time in decades, my house felt like my home, not like the personal bank of my family parasites. 6 months after the confrontation in the garden, I received an unexpected call. It was Scott, and his voice sounded different, more humble, more broken. "Mom," he began, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I had to call you to tell you that you were right about everything." I listened in silence as he told me Brenda had left him when their economic circumstances worsened. "She left with another man as soon as I lost my steady job," he explained. "She didn't even leave me a note. She just disappeared with half of the few things we still had." "And what did you expect?" I asked, without cruelty, but also without pity. "She was a woman who cheated on you with me, and me with you. Did you really think she would be loyal to you when you were no longer useful?" "No," he admitted. "I guess I knew that would happen. I guess I always knew what kind of person she was. But it was easier to ignore it than to face it." He told me he was working odd jobs, living in a rented room, and trying to rebuild his life from the ground up. "It's hard, Mom. It's very hard to live honestly after years of taking shortcuts." "It should be hard," I replied. "That's the price for the choices you made." "Do you think you could ever forgive me?" he asked in a small voice. "Scott," I said after a long pause, "forgiveness isn't something you ask for. It's something you earn. And you earn it through consistent actions over a long period, not with words in a phone call." "I understand," he mumbled. "If you truly want to earn my forgiveness," I continued, "then start by earning your own respect. Live honestly, work hard, help other people without expecting anything in return. And perhaps in a few years, if you've shown that you've truly changed, we can talk again." "A few years?" he asked, surprised. "Scott, you stole from me for 2 years.
You lied to ML for 2 years.
You humiliated me for 2 years. Did you really expect the process of forgiveness to be shorter than the process of loss?" The conversation was a year ago. I haven't heard from Scott since, and that's fine. If he truly changes, he'll do it for the right reasons, not to manipulate me again. Meanwhile, I continue to live my best life. Samuel and I stayed in touch after Spain and are now planning trips together as friends. Last month, we were at Niagara Falls. Next year, we want to visit Peru. My house is full of photos of my adventures, books I really wanted to read, plants I bought simply because I liked them. My fridge is full of food I chose myself, not leftovers from dinners I cooked for people who didn't respect me. And most importantly, my money is mine. Every cent I spend is a conscious decision for my own well-being and happiness. There are no more fake emergencies, no more desperate pleas, no more guilt about enjoying the fruits of 45 years of honest work.
Some people ask me if I feel lonely without Scott in my life.
The answer is no, I feel free. There's a big difference between being alone and having inner peace. For 2 years, I was surrounded by people who lied to me, stole from me, and manipulated me. Now, I am surrounded by people who respect me, value me, and genuinely love me. My friend Emma told me last week, "Christina, you look 10 years younger since you removed those parasites from your life." And she's right, because when you stop giving your energy to people who don't deserve it, that energy returns to you multiplied. When you stop funding the irresponsibility of others, you can invest in your own happiness. When you stop being a victim, you become the protagonist of your own story. If I've learned anything from this experience, it's that it's never too late to reclaim your dignity, never too late to set boundaries, and never, ever too late to put your own happiness before the comfort of others. At 72, I am finally living the life I deserve. And Scott and Brenda, wherever they are no longer a part of it.